Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we're diving into what is honestly one of the most bizarre, head-scratching anomalies in all of Scripture. It's a moment that, at first glance, literally looks like a mistake, an imperfect miracle. We're unlocking the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, where Jesus heals a blind man. But, get this, it actually takes 2 tries. Let's get right into it, because understanding this wild anomaly, it might just completely reframe how you view your own spiritual growth.
So, the absolutely crucial question we got to start with is this. Why on earth would Jesus heal in stages if he had the power to heal instantly? I mean, think about it. Literally every other miracle account we have shows Jesus' power as immediate and total. The storm stops instantly. The demons flee immediately. The paralyzed walk right then and there. But here, the healing unfolds progressively. It creates this massive curiosity gap, right? Like, was his power draining? Did the first attempt just kind of fail? Well, the gospel writers consistently portrayed Jesus with absolute authority, so we know for sure this staged healing must be entirely intentional. So let's actually walk through the exact, frankly startling sequence of this event. Step 1, Jesus touches the blind man. Step 2, the man looks up and says something completely wild. He says he sees men, but they look like trees walking. Step 3, Jesus touches his eyes again. And finally, step 4, the man's sight is fully restored and he sees clearly. This progressive sequence right here, this is the exact mystery we're solving today. Why is there a gap between steps 2 and 4? Well, that brilliantly illustrates our core thesis for today. What we're looking at here is not merely an event about physical eyesight. It's a living parable. Jesus is deliberately taking an inward reality and externalizing it. He's acting out a spiritual truth in real time using physical sight as the medium. To really grasp this, we have to remember that Mark, the writer of this gospel, is an absolute genius at placing stories exactly where they need to be to make a point. Let's zoom out for a second. What's really fascinating is how Mark strategically sandwiches this miracle right into the timeline. Just look at the flow. First, the disciples completely fail to grasp Jesus' teaching, and that's even after seeing massive miracles and crowds being fed. Second, Jesus literally asks them, "Having eyes, do you not see?" That line is enormously important. Third, right on cue, we get the 2-stage healing of the blind man. And fourth, immediately after, we get Peter's flawed confession. You see, this sequencing is no accident. The placement is a massive contextual clue showing us exactly what Jesus is doing. Let's explicitly draw a line between these two things so we can see the full picture here. On one side, we have the physical blindness of the man. On the other side, we've got the spiritual blindness of the disciples. The disciples are spiritually experiencing exactly what the blind man is physically experiencing. This right here is the central aha moment of this explainer. Jesus is using the blind man's physical condition to hold up a mirror to the disciples' spiritual condition. They aren't totally blind anymore, sure, but they definitely aren't seeing perfectly yet either. And that brings us to what is easily one of the strangest quotes in the Gospels. "I see men like trees walking." The man can see, but not clearly. There's genuine vision happening now, but a heavily distorted perception still remains. And honestly, isn't that a remarkably accurate picture of spiritual awakening? A lot of folks imagine spiritual understanding as an instantaneous switch. 1 second you're in the dark, the next you just have perfect divine clarity. But this quote perfectly captures the messy middle. It captures exactly what it's like when the old blindness starts lifting, but confusion still remains. To prove this, just look at what happens right after the miracle. Simon Peter correctly identifies Jesus as the Christ. Now that sounds like full clarity, right? But within moments, Peter turns right around and incorrectly rebukes Jesus for talking about suffering in the crucifixion. Peter sees correctly and incorrectly at the exact same time. Just like the blind man. The shapes of reality are starting to emerge. Peter can kind of see the outline of who Jesus is, but his understanding is still completely distorted. He is stuck in that men as trees stage. Let's actually map this out, because this miracle is teaching us something profound about how spiritual sight actually works. It comes progressively. There's an initial awakening, then partial understanding, that's followed by ongoing correction, and finally, increasing clarity. We really need to normalize this. If you've ever felt like things are finally starting to make sense, but you're still confused by certain aspects of your faith or just the world around you, you are right on track. The men as trees phase is a standard, totally expected part of growth. I want you to really take this message to heart today. Partial sight is still sight. Imperfect understanding is real transformation. So often, we get really frustrated with our own spiritual progress.
We tend to think, man, if I still struggle to understand, maybe nothing happened at all. Maybe my faith isn't even real. But this miracle says otherwise. The man was no longer blind after that first touch. He simply wasn't seeing fully yet. Incomplete clarity absolutely does not mean your faith is absent. Now, let's see how this all builds into the actual method Jesus uses here, because honestly, it's just as revealing as the outcome itself. The text tells us Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of Bethsaida, which naturally begs the question, why outside the village? Why did Jesus take him away from the crowds to do this? Unlike some miracles that are performed from a distance or in front of these massive audiences, this one begins with an incredibly intimate withdrawal. Consider the specific elements of this intimate method. First, it happens entirely away from noise and spectacle. Mark actually often shows true revelation happening in quiet places. Second, it's a subtle contrast to public hardness. Bethsaida had already seen miracles but remained largely unresponsive. But the most moving point is this third one. Guided by Christ before seeing. The man couldn't navigate himself. Christ had to personally take him by the hand and physically lead him into the quiet before restoring his sight. Spiritually speaking, true revelation requires internal receptivity, and we are so often personally guided by Christ long before we fully understand where we're even going. And in all of this, there is just incredible mercy in the process. Jesus doesn't abandon the man in his partial sight. He doesn't just say, well, you can see shapes now, good enough, you're on your own. No, he stays engaged. He continues until clarity comes. I think a lot of people live in fear that their weakness, their confusion, or their incomplete understanding will somehow cause God to just give up on them. But this moment, this is your reminder of Christ's patience. The exact same Christ who initiates your illumination is the one who's going to complete it. We also have to acknowledge the man's response here. I do not yet see clearly. What a genuinely beautiful display of honesty. He doesn't pretend to have perfect 20/20 vision. Contrast that with the dangerous, arrogant illusion of perfect sight, like we see with the Pharisees. Admitting you need more clarity, that is the very pathway to fuller healing. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that Jesus is not irritated by gradual growth. He's incredibly patient with incomplete vision. Remember, Jesus spent years, literally years, walking with disciples who were totally stuck in the men as trees stage. I mean, they misunderstood greatness, they misunderstood suffering, they misunderstood his entire kingdom. Yet he didn't write them off. He just continued teaching them, correcting them, and revealing himself more fully over time. If he was patient with their gradual growth, you can be sure he'll be patient with yours. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Christ does not merely open eyes. He continues opening them. If you find yourself frustrated today, feeling like you only see men like trees walking, please don't be discouraged. The second touch might still be unfolding. Keep leaning in, keep being totally honest about what you don't see, and trust the process. So what is one area in your life right now where you need to humbly ask for that second touch of clarity? Think about that. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep seeking that clearer vision.